Good evening. I'm Kate Cruikshank. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Bloomington and Monroe County. And on behalf of the League and the Monroe County Public Library, I'd like to welcome you to what I'm sure is going to be an exciting evening. At a time when we're assaulted by accusations of fake news and exaggerations and distortions from all sides, it's increasingly difficult to find solid ground on which we can stand to even think about embarking on constructive dialogue with those of differing views. With every election, the problem is compounded as unacknowledged sources spew forth uncorroborated pitches to sway us with little to no regard for facts. But facts matter, and our speaker tonight has been working since 1992 to make sure we have access to them. Please join me in welcoming the founder and president of VoteSmart, Richard Kimball. Do you need this? You don't need this.
Am I on?
You're on.
Am I on? Can you hear me? Okay, good. I don't quite understand Kate Cruikshank or Lynn Strube. Where is Lynn here? She's sitting here right there, who got this ball rolling and got me to drive all the way down here. And you know, getting people in a non-election year, cold evening, to come out for a voter education speech, I guess you must have some sort of cattle prod, or that's pretty good. I'm impressed. You know, I've been traveling. I've maybe done 30 of these in 12 states. So this is a pretty important one tonight because I'm announcing something that's a little new. But it's hard to get people interested in voter education. Oddly, I'm not going to talk a lot about VoteSmart. People think and come to these thinking I'm going to talk all about this organization that I'm part of. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it in the beginning, and then about 4.5 minutes of a great video piece that the students put together. They're going to teach you all you need to know about VoteSmart. I just want to make sure we all end up on the same page. And the only way I can do that is by going through a little political history in terms of manipulation and how it all came about to make a thing like VoteSmart necessary. In my case, I told this story last night, and Adelaide told me I should tell it all the time, and I'm not sure how interesting it is. But in my case, I used to be in politics. I worked for Walter Mondale and Daniel Moynihan and Mo Udall and a variety of politicians years ago in a former life, over 30 years ago. Was in the state senate in Arizona representing Phoenix, elected to a statewide office called the Corporation Commission, which regulated utilities and stocks and transportation in Arizona, and became the Democratic nominee for the United States Senate when Barry Goldwater retired, 30 years ago. VoteSmart started for me during that, towards the end of that campaign in a single event. I had been falling behind in the campaign. We'd been doing well. I stumbled a little bit, making some mistakes in the campaign, and money started to freeze up, and we were in trouble, and we started, our tracking polls were going south, and we knew we had to do something to shake it up. That's what all candidates do for a major office when they're running into trouble. They do something to shake it up, to give the public a reason to re-look at them and give them another consideration. In my case, my opponent, a little-known congressman from Mesa by the name of John McCain, you might have heard of him, we knew had a horrible temper. He knows he has a horrible temper. John served on the board of VoteSmart for a number of years, is my political opposite, even though everybody knows who he is. Nobody knows who the hell I am. But we knew he had a temper, and we had to do something to shake it up, and we decided in my campaign that what we would do is do this vicious attack against John, personal attack against John during the closing argument of our statewide primetime televised debate. And it was a horrible attack. And a problem occurred during the last commercial break when I was about to be introduced as soon as the commercial ended to give my 2-minute close and do this attack. And the problem occurred because I was looking at John. I was very young at the time, in my 30s. I was looking at John, and I realized I didn't dislike him. I actually liked the guy. A lot about him I respected and thought was wonderful, that his service to his country and a lot of the 5.5 years of hell he went through a prison. And I didn't want to do this attack. I told myself, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to do this. It made me very nervous on the stage. I remember when you give up your closing argument that you'd practiced and practiced with your staff, and suddenly you have nothing prepared to say. I remember my knees started shaking like this on the stage, and I was afraid everybody was going to see him behind the podium. And I always remember I went like this hard, trying to stop him. And then it occurred to me everybody's going to think I have to pee, and that made me more nervous. Anyway. I can still remember almost word for word what I said during that close, although I have never gone back to see that debate and don't want to. What happened is that when I was introduced, I looked into the camera and I said these words. I said, understand what it is we do to you, referring to John and myself. Understand what it is we do to you. We spend all of our time collecting money from people that we don't really know, who are going to want access to us if we happen to win. And we both spend the money in the same 3 identical ways. The first thing we do is we hire a bunch of people to come and do surveys and measure you, do a market analysis of you, find out what a woman wants to buy versus a man, an older voter versus a younger voter, a black voter versus a white voter. And we are not wrong when we're done. The second thing we do with that money is we then hire consultants that can tailor our image to fit what we then know you want to buy. And the third thing we do, the most expensive thing we do, is we then buy all the media time necessary to bombard you with the meaningless, issueless nonsense that inevitably results. And whichever one of the two of us can do this to you best is going to win this election. The audience was just like you are, just dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Now, John got up, gave sort of a typical standard closing argument, and my staff was mad at me that I didn't take the shot that we needed. A couple weeks later, there was a dinner being held for me in Washington, D.C., and before the dinner, I went over to see Barry Goldwater, who was retiring from the seat we were running for. And he was a good friend of my father's, and I have always liked Barry. He was always frank and blunt and in your face, and you didn't have any doubts about where he stood on stuff. And I liked him. I really appreciate it. Even though we were on opposite sides of the aisle, I just liked him. And I walked into his office, and he immediately got up and shooed everybody else out, told me to sit down, and like the dutiful kid that I was in front of him, I sat down, and he slammed the door shut. And he just started ranting about how when he'd gotten in politics as a young man running for the city council in Phoenix, how he'd gotten into it because he felt passionate about the issues. He thought he saw a better way. He wanted to have his day in the public forum. He wanted to argue his case and talk to people about it, convince them that we could do things differently and be improved. And he said he hadn't been able to do it for years because he constantly had to spend all of his time collecting money to defend himself from the well-heeled Democrats we were sending to campaign against him the last few times out. It was like he was the only person that actually heard what I said in my closing argument. And so we started talking, and we talked a little more, and then we talked to other people like Carter and Ford and McGovern, his political opposite. You can't get on our board without a political opposite. I don't know if you know that, so it's very diverse. Dukakis, Hatfield back in those days, most of us were getting out of politics, but we all knew there was something to worry about here, what we were doing to people that hadn't been done in the past. So that's how Vote Smart started long ago. It was 20 years in research before anybody nationally found out about it, and that we went to and started to advertise. Okay, so I told that story. I forgot. I want to make sure you all meet my wife and know who she is, because she's been with me. That's Adelaide. I always insist that Adelaide sit right here in front of me and do that, Nancy Reagan thing and look up at me adoringly, hanging on my every word, but no, she refuses. Murder, robbery, rape, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. The air will be rent with the cries from the distressed, the soil soaked in blood, the nation black with crime, if you elect Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States. That was a congressman back in his day, an unusual congressman. My point is that we've always occasionally let somebody get into public service that is dishonorable and behaves dishonorably. I will argue tonight that we have never let so many, and that they are not only expected occasionally by us as citizens, but they are encouraged by us as citizens. They are supported by us as citizens, and they are funded by us as citizens. The problem that you see isn't so much them as it is us. Here are a couple more typical quotes of that day, same period of time. Liberty cannot be preserved without general knowledge amongst the people, who have an indisputable, inalienable, indefeasible, divine right to that most dreaded and cherished kind of knowledge. I speak of knowledge of the character and conduct of our rulers. That was John Adams worrying about what he was doing at the Constitutional Convention. He was worried about this notion of casting out power to the people. Would they know enough to somehow get into a voting booth and collectively make wise decisions? John Adams, you might remember, was the firebrand that pushed through successfully the Constitutional Convention because he was willing to give up one of his most cherished beliefs, and that was to end slavery. It was a means to compromise a very cherished principle just to move us an inch or two forward and make the country successful. A degree of compromise you will not see today in these record line, party line votes where they don't even talk to each other anymore. The youngest member of that convention said this. He said, "Popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both. A people that mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power that knowledge gives." That was James Madison, the principal drafter of the Constitution, because he came in with a Virginia plan that largely became the Constitution. Principal drafter of the Federalist Papers that successfully argued for that with the public, and principal drafter of the Bill of Rights that we all take as second nature today. That was him worrying about it. Would people know? Would they be educated enough? Would they be able to somehow do this? The most eloquent words, in my opinion, almost everybody's opinion, are words you've all read. And if you've been to Washington, D.C., I promise you, you saw them tattooed in marble right over his head. A nation that expects to be ignorant and free expects what never was and never will be. That was Thomas Jefferson. These people were all worried about what they're doing. They talked to each other. They wrote to each other. This crazy notion, this bit of philosophy, will this actually work by casting power out to the people? They weren't thinking about it the way we do. They were deciding whether or not they believed in it so intensely that they were willing to commit treason against their nation. And certainly hang. The whole Western world, sure they were going to hang. They largely thought they were likely to hang. That tends to focus your thoughts. They thought about it intensely. Not like us. We don't think about it the way they did. But when you boil it all down, this is what you support. You support winning the power to run your life, to tell you what you can and cannot do, and your families what they can and cannot do. The power to set the punishments that you will suffer if you don't obey. You want to have that kind of awesome power, take it and throw it away to millions and millions of people you do not know and have no hope of ever knowing them. To fight for that would be absurd without fighting for their right to the facts and the truth and reality that is dependent upon those facts. We don't do that fight much anymore. I'm going to show you, I love this part. Of course, my computer just died, so I got to start it up again, so forgive me for a minute. I have one of those old antique computers, and nothing is ever always there. Voila. Okay. Here's some quotes you'll enjoy, the eloquence of your... Come on, where are you? You're over there now. Get down. Get there. Some quotes from your current congressman. Staff also collected a variety of posters and billboards. We have hundreds of these things. These are just little sprinkling samples. It's gone international, this stuff. But they just want you to see some of the stuff that they collected and a little sampling of it. That's my favorite. When they showed me, I just loved this real estate guy that was trying to take advantage of this. I just thought that was priceless. I'm going to give you a quick history in 3 commercials about how all of us as consultants and politicians learned dramatic new means of talking to millions. 3 television commercials. The first television commercial I'm going to show you is the second television commercial ever produced. It was done by Adlai Stevenson. Most of you look old enough to remember who he was. The egghead. For those of you that might be younger, he was the Democratic nominee for President of the United States that was defeated by Eisenhower in the 50s. Anyway, his campaign manager was a very young guy by the name of Russ Hemingway, who was sitting in his Chicago office. I mean young, in his early 20s, maybe late teens, I don't know. Very young. He was alive until 2 years ago. And he saw the first commercial ever produced. And he panicked when he saw it. And he got in his car and ran down the whistle-stop train that Adlai was on, doing the stop somewhere, wherever he was. Got on the train, ran back to the caboose and said, Adlai, you got to get off this thing. You've got to go cut one of these commercials. Eisenhower is talking to thousands and thousands of people every day in their living rooms on these new things called television sets. You've got to cut a commercial. And Stevenson refused and said, if we're to advertise ourselves like boxes of cereal, democracy will die. For you could not win the presidency without proving you were unworthy of the job. Now, by that definition, everybody you've been voting for is telling you you shouldn't be voting for. But Stevenson, political prudence, won the day. He realized he could not compete if he didn't. And a few weeks later, his campaign manager, his young campaign manager, Russ Hemingway, convinced him to go do one. And I'm going to show it to you. The second television commercial is the most famous political commercial ever produced, certainly in political science and consultant circles, because of what was learned by this little system. It's called the Daisy ad. It was done in the Goldwater-Johnson campaign. And background to it was that a reporter had gone up to Barry Goldwater and said, would you consider using the bomb if we get into a conflict in Southeast Asia? And Goldwater simply said what had been said basically by all Western leaders ever since the invention of the bomb, that he wouldn't put his cards on the table in front of the nation's enemies, that he wouldn't expose what he would or would not do. He didn't think that was appropriate, as he might be president someday. Perfectly reasonable position. But Johnson saw his chance to try something. This was right after the Bay of Pigs, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when people are in their backyards digging bomb shelters to survive. My job as a young kid was to collect all the canned goods I could so that our family would have something to eat if all hell broke loose. People had been really scared. And so Johnson claimed that Goldwater was crazy and might take us into a Holocaust and created the Daisy commercial. The third commercial you're going to see, you've never seen it. It never played. We got our hands on it. It was Johnson's backup commercial on another issue of that period. And so if the Daisy commercial doesn't convince you where we're going, I'm sure this one will. But he didn't need the backup commercial because the Daisy commercial, he never expected to be so incredibly successful. He only had to pay to play it one time on television. It started a feeding frenzy amongst all the news media who kept playing it and asking the question, was Goldwater really going to create a war, a Holocaust? And as Goldwater would talk to me for years afterwards, and I'd tell people, you know, it's hard to run for president when your basic stump speech becomes, it's okay. You can vote for me, I'm not crazy. But that's basically the box he was put in. I'll let the third commercial just speak for itself. Daisy.
For President Johnson on November 3rd, the stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Pretty tough.
We represent the majority of the people in Alabama who hate niggrism, Catholicism, Judaism, and all the isms of the whole world. So said Robert Creed of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan. He also said, I like Barry Goldwater. He needs our help. Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
Tough stuff. The lesson was learned, and we've been building on it ever since. And that is that you can move people much cheaper, much more economical, much easier to move them emotionally than it is to move them intellectually. You can move people's prejudice, you can move their hatred, You can easily move the most popular thing to move, which is your fear of whoever, in a 30-second ad. You cannot move people intellectually on an issue facing society and the options for dealing with it in 30 seconds. So if you want to win, don't bother. Any consultant would tell you that. That's not where the game is played. Dangerous, dangerous stuff. Should I show this? I don't know. Okay, this never played. The students put this in there to embarrass me, I think. Here you go. If you're upset by the sight of fornicating animals, close your eyes.
What is being done to us by the democratically controlled legislature in this state? Do you have any idea how it hurts taxpayers to have the Democrats behind things in Washington? Why would anyone want to be in this position for 10 years? Isn't it about time we get the Democrats off our back?
It was never intended to play. It was a joke, but they found it, and there we go, and so there you have it. Okay, it's harder for me to, anyway, when I get home, it's going out. All of that manipulation, all of that abuse of people to move them emotionally is enormously expensive. That's what requires you to get into the mass media. And I'll tell you, I'm a little slower than maybe most other candidates were when I was young running for the U.S. Senate. And I'll tell you how I finally figured it out. This is a true story. I was going door to door. I had hundreds of volunteers, a lot of supporters. We were going door to door as we did almost every day. It was sort of my MO. And I kept hitting door after door, and people were in school or at work, and they were never there. And I kept saying, sorry to miss you, Richard. Sorry I missed you, Richard. Sorry I missed you, Richard. And I thought, you know, what am I doing? And I started to daydream. And at one of the doors, I thought, wouldn't it be great if there were 100 people in the backyard? They were having a party, and they invited me in and to talk to them for about an hour. And I got to, you know, tell them why I was doing this crazy thing, you know, what I thought about this issue and how I'd considered this one. I really didn't know too much about this. What do you think about it? And having a real give and take the way this is, where I'm getting to know you and you are getting to know me as a candidate, a real valuable communication. And I thought, well, what if at the next door there's another 100 people and they give me another hour? And at the next door there's another 100 people. And at the next door another 100. And I started thinking, what if I don't have to sleep? And I can do this 24 hours a day, never take a day off, and I can do it for the 2 months left in the election. And I am so brilliant, I am so articulate and clever that I convince every single one of those people to vote for me. It had added up to 2.4% of the votes by election day. You're not going to win that way. You've got to get into the mass media, and that requires talking to people by the thousands, the tens of thousands, even millions. It requires a lot of money. And that's why 70 to 80% of a candidate's time isn't talking to people, it's collecting money, unless they happen to be independently wealthy. One of the students years ago put this thing together for me, but it gives you a sense of it. George Washington here spent about enough money to buy 158 gallons of rum and beer for a party at Mount Vernon. You know, people don't know this. For 100 years, candidates would lose votes by going out and say, vote for me, 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 and my opponent's an idiot, or that kind of thing. You offered yourself for public service. Your minions might go out and slam away at each other, but you were dignified and you stayed out of the fray. McKinley never left his front porch when he was running for president of the United States. That's something that's relatively, at least new in the last century. In any case, we knew it was really changed and saw some things we'd never seen before in 1960 when Kennedy won, and we discovered that $260 million had been spent during that election from various interests. And you can find articles in 1960 where our generation, when we were a lot younger, were energized by it, and we were going to do something about it. You know, we didn't think that was quite right, and this is what we did, because those candidates need it. That's 2008 and is an underestimate. It's gotten much worse, and it will continue to get worse. You know, party leaders on both sides have a very kindly heart to their new young candidates that are all idiots. I know this because I was once an idiot. I'm going to give you one of my idiot stories to give you a sense of how you get wrapped up into this, even though you might have good intentions when you're running for office for the first time. In my case, I got a call from the AFL-CIO. They flew me out to Washington, D.C. and took me over into their building across Lafayette Park and into a room about 8 by 12 with 6 other U.S. Senate candidates, including 3 incumbents, and we sat there talking, waiting for our few minutes of time in front of COPE, the political arm of labor, which was stronger back then than it is today. When my turn came up, I went into this enormous conference room, huge conference tables. It looked like, to me, my recollection is it went on for a block. And with all these overstuffed leather chairs up and down with these labor leaders from all over the country, dock workers, steel workers, plumbers, all of them, sitting in these overstuffed chairs. Some of them smoking cigars. It was like right out of a Frank Capra movie on this guy. But I don't remember what I said. I literally don't remember what I said. But at the end of it, they said, Richard, we'd like to start you off with this check today for $50,000. And I thought, wow, that's illegal. And they did what happened to me often when I was a young candidate. He put his arm around me, this guy by the name of Perkins that was head of it. And he said, Richard, no, you don't understand. Every single one of these people here has their own political action committee. And we just like to get together and bundle it and spend it jointly. It was a means of circumventing the rules back then. My first job in politics was with Common Cause. You may remember they got started out of Watergate, so I knew the law pretty well. And I said, well, if you really organize and it's documented that way, boy, that would be okay. Then I guess, you know, I stuck out my hand to take the $50,000. And they said, wait a minute, and handed me an 11.5, literally handed me an 11.5 by 8 sheet of paper. And it had maybe 15, 20 names on it. And they said, these are some survey specialists, some pollsters that we have a lot of confidence in. We want you to spend the first $20,000 of this 50 to go back to Arizona, hire one of these people. They can figure out what the citizens want to buy, what they like about you, what they dislike about you, what they like and dislike about your opponents. Take a good snapshot of what the politics is like in Arizona. And you think as a candidate, well, that's okay. They're not asking me to do anything dishonest. But, you know, I'll take the $30,000 that's left and go campaign on the things that I'm concerned about. And they said, wait a minute. And they handed me another one with about half as many names on it. And I always remember the expression they used. They said, these guys have some trophies on the wall. And what they meant by that was that these were consultants that knew how to go into other states, had gone into other states, governor's races, congressional races, Senate races, and took the survey results and were able to tailor messages and speeches and commercials that enhanced the image and were able to be victorious and thus had a trophy on the wall. And I got pissed off in the meeting. I said, no, I'm not doing this. This is my campaign. I'm campaigning because I feel passionate about a lot of issues here. I disagree with McCain here. I want to have my argument. I want to have my day in the public forum about Star Wars and Contrade and the issues that were issues back in those days. And he put his arm around me. Says, now, Richard, we don't want to stop you from saying whatever it is you want to say in your campaign. You can go back to Arizona and go door to door. Say anything you want. But we're not stupid. We're not going to give you $50,000 and the close to $1 million that came flooding in right after it and more after that. This is hard-earned laborers all over the country. We need to make sure that you're smart enough to spend it in ways that we know will put you in the United States Senate. That you're smart enough to do that. Because we need you, Richard. We need you in the United States Senate. Wow. And you think, they're not asking me to lie. They're not asking me to do anything bad. they're going to do some stuff, and I can still talk about what I want, and took the money. So you're right now your channel. You're already in there trying to get the money. You're going to get that money to do what's about to happen. In my case, they found out I wasn't very popular. I was too liberal for Arizona, and they created scenes of me. And the only popular thing they could find is that I was born there. So I'm with scenes of Grand Canyon on horseback that I've never been on before in my life, and Orange Street. It's all humiliating, embarrassing kinds of stuff. I guess I'll go straight to this. So Vote Smart was in the research stages for 20-some years before it really went officially public. We were very strict on ourselves. You couldn't get on our board without a political enemy. All the students that would make it possible were not paid. They worked full-time often for 10 weeks, for 40-hour work weeks. They get some credit from their schools. It worked like the Peace Corps. If you were paid staff, you had to sign on for a 2-year tour and got minimal wages. And it was working pretty well. And the most difficult thing they ever did was this. It's called the courage test. The board wanted to measure this deterioration in the public's ability to acquire real information about who we were and what we were likely to do for you or to you if we got elected. We organized over 200 newspapers all over the country, almost every major daily, including your one here in Indianapolis. A lot of other national media like Fox News, CNN, the NewsHour, National Journal, a lot of different. All of us got together and agreed that there were about 20 to 30 issues that we knew they would have to deal with in Congress in the next session if they were elected. And we knew that they were the key issues that you as the employer were demanding that they settle and deal with and get results from. So we took that series of issues, and all of us committed to pound away at every single congressman running, in this case in 1996, and asked him, will you not do the right and honorable thing and provide citizens in a database this information about your intentions on these issues so they can see them and compare them with whoever your opponent is. They had to be asked by a key leader of their own party from our board. They might have gotten letters from Barry Goldwater years ago, or John McCain, or Michael Dukakis, or Jerry Ferraro on our board. If they would write to their own party leaders, won't you do the right and honorable thing? The newspapers would editorialize about it, saying, please do the right, or write them letters, again using those words, doing the right and honorable thing. Staff had to document a minimum of 6 efforts over 6 weeks to get them to do it. In 1996 there you can see 72% said yes and provided the evidence. I thought that was horrible. Most of the board thought that was pretty good. I thought 1 out of 4 won't do it no matter who asks them. I thought it was horrible. We duplicated the test exactly the same way every election for 10 years. Every election it deteriorated by 2 to 5 percentage points. No difference between the behavior of the Republicans and the Democrats. Third-party candidates did take it more often because we paid attention to them, but not them. This one little uptick here in 2004 is because the Knight Ridder organization put in a ton of money, and their newspapers all put chicken heads on them and really abused the candidates that weren't doing it. They thought they could drive it back up to the 70th percentile. They put that's where that stutter step comes from, though. We continued the test until 2006 when it dropped below 50%. If you want to know the people that are least likely to answer your questions, those are the people that have the most ability to control their message, the most money to do so. That's your incumbents. Just about 1 in 4 were willing to do it. Most, vast majority would not. The reasons they weren't, we have hundreds of these. This is just, again, a small sampling that was put together of what the journalists gathered together, what the researchers gathered together, of reasons and excuses they were giving to not answer your questions. It comes up pretty quick, but it has about 15, 16 samples. My favorite is the last one that comes up here in a second, my home state of Arizona, which I find so embarrassing. Yeah, we all organized it. We have 172 academics from all over the country that did the questionnaire. We still do this a little bit, and I'll explain it in Q&A, but not like we used to, because it was enormously expensive to do that testing. The point here is that fear sells. Fear just sells. I mean, it's basically the same principle as being in a crowded movie theater and somebody saying, "Fire, fire!" You don't go check the facts, you get up and move. You tell people to be worried, fearful of something, and they pay attention. You don't pay much attention to good news. That's why you don't see much of it. I mean, I bet there's a lot of people in the audience that probably don't know that they came up recently with a 100% cure and a vaccine for the Ebola virus, or that the manatee and the panda bear are now off the endangered species list, or veterans homelessness is at a 25-year low, or world hunger, as bad as it is a 20-year low. You don't get, good news doesn't really make you pay attention much. What makes you pay attention is making people worry, feeling threats against you or your family, or that something is endangering you. Probably the biggest news item that didn't get any play at all in 2012, which was huge news for Project VoteSmart, was that in 2012, it finally crossed the 50% line. That meaning that the money that is contributed to candidates by citizens to encourage them and support them and let other people see them the way you see them was not used by candidates to be encouraging or supportive. It was used to trash whoever their opponent was. That line went to 80% in 2016 because it works, making people afraid. All of this, you know, including what's happening in civics education, 33% loss in civics education in grade schools, 66% over the last 20 years in high school. People don't get the civics education we all did when we went to school. This allows us as candidates to pander in a fantasy land that is being created to people. Now, it's this point where my chief advisor, my wife, tells me to shut up, because at this point I've convinced my audience what they really want to do is go home and end it all. And I don't mean to do that. I'm one of those people that feels lucky. I mean, I just feel incredibly lucky to be me at this time. If I was sitting in the lap of God, is the story I tell my students, if I was sitting in the lap of God and God asked me, what American generation do you want to be born into, I'd feel like a jerk, a stupid jerk, if I didn't choose the one I'm in. I don't want to be around during the American Revolution when the country's being traipsed up and down by foreign power trying to keep us under thumb. I don't want to be around when they come back in 1812 and burn down Washington and the White House and have the president running into the mountains to save his life. And I don't want to be here when 400,000 of us are slaughtering each other in the fields and cities all over the country. And I don't want to be here as one of the 38 million corpses left out of World War I. And I don't want to sleep under a bridge in the dirt and the grime during the Depression and the Dust Bowl. And I don't want to be amongst the 80 million dead of World War II. I got up this morning, I had fresh orange juice from Florida, and I had a cup of coffee from Colombia. And if I didn't like the breakfast at the hotel, I could go outside to dozens of grocery stores and restaurants and have food from all over the world. I could have it. I could plug on my computer and I could talk to people all over the country just like that. And I could turn on TV and in real time see things that were going on everywhere. And if I wanted to, right now I could use this baby and call my granddaughter who's teaching skiing on a mountain in New Zealand. Or I could go down the street and I could sit in a chair. I could literally sit in a chair, have, order an ice spritzer and turn on a Hollywood movie as they lift me 40,000 feet into the middle of the air, scoop me along at 400 miles an hour and go visit her. I'd feel so ridiculous sitting in front of an Abraham Lincoln who's sitting there slumped under a chair, exhausted, and say, Abe, you just can't believe how tough it is on us in 2017. The country's strong, incredibly strong. Our parents and our parents' parents and our parents' parents built up this incredible golden jewel and handed it over to us. I think what I'm talking about tonight is the issue of our time. And now you get 4.5 minutes of what we're trying to do to find a way out of the box that consultants, candidates are all putting us in. Pay attention. It's the only 4.5 minutes you get.
Imagine straightforward facts about any state or national politician on any issue of concern to you. It is perhaps the most hopeful reality in politics today. Hundreds of conservatives and liberals putting their differences aside and joining together to ensure that most essential component in our democracy, a citizen's right to the facts about the people they elected or those seeking to replace them. It's what U.S. News and World Report said would make the founders weep with joy. Thousands of hours of detailed research, all so that you can finally, simply, and instantly get the facts. I Spy. Take a magnifying glass and be able to instantly examine any politician's files, every biographical detail, every key vote in easy-to-understand terms, every issue position, every public comment on key topics, every special interest rating, every top campaign contributor. For example, just pick a category, such as ratings, and review every special interest rating that exists on the politician you selected, all there for you at votesmart.org. Political Galaxy navigates through the universe of facts. Name any politician, select any issue, and instantly arrive at every fact related to that person on that issue. For example, pick votes, and instantly you're transported to every key vote made on that issue in easy-to-understand terms. Find your political soulmate with Vote Easy. Simply enter your zip code and your area candidates will appear. Then state your position on any of a dozen of the most pressing issues facing our nation and watch as each politician's yard sign moves towards you in agreement or away, depending on their public records. Simply click on the sign to find out what facts made that sign move forward or back. Accolades for Vote Easy are already pouring in. Put it to the test yourself. Want more? Simply register any politician of interest to you. Every time that politician makes a public statement, votes, receives money, or a new rating on that issue, you'll get an instant update. No computer? No problem. Just call our toll-free research hotline and your own personal researcher will look up anything you want to know about any politician running for office, whether it's state, regional, or national. Bill Moyers called us a bright light. CNN distributed our materials to their affiliates. GovTrack and the New York Times have supported our work.
No.
Very serious mission. That is the most critical day.
Okay, what I'm going to do here now is show you something that is brand new at VoteSmart.
VoteSmart. Just the facts.
You know, it's so depressing to me when I say the media doesn't cover good news. The students, there's over 9,000 students that have worked at VoteSmart over the years, making this possible for people. They never got a penny. Volunteers, there are members of VoteSmart that come out and work a couple of weeks here, putting this thing together. One of the things they've done during the last week when I started this tour and this current tour to announce what we call OnPoint in Minneapolis, in Chicago, Detroit, and half a dozen cities, is that they called every single member of the media, all print, all radio, all television, saying we've worked 3 years now on this new tool to make this all possible over a cell phone, over a smartphone. This is my last chance. Not once has a member of the media shown up. They're all depressed in the office, why they can't figure out why they don't want to cover this stuff. But I'm going to give this to you. You're going to be the only people around here that know about this. So tell your friends if you think it's interesting. It's incredibly powerful what they put on the smartphone. We can't put all of our data on this little phone. You know, we have data on a few 100,000 politicians over the years that they've collected. 2 million speeches, you know, we're close to 2 million speeches in public government. They collect everything. Got votes, all the ratings. You can't make sense of it here. If we put it all on here, you wouldn't be able to use it. It would just overwhelm you. It just doesn't make sense. So they came up with a trick. They've been working on it for years, and they finally got it done. It's called OnPoint. You can just go to the App Store and download it for yourself. It's free, as everything we do is free. And what they do is they pick 10 to 20 issues every week that are in the news, that are being debated by Congress, or there's some reason the staff decides this is most likely what you would be stimulated to look at during this week or two because it's become a public issue. So they freshen it with a 10, 20 every week, and you just go scroll through them. You find, you know, something that maybe triggers your interest, or maybe you just saw something in the paper and see if we picked up on it in our listing here. Guns, of course, has become almost a weekly horror story and is constantly being hit. So let's say in the sample here, you pick guns and you click on it. It will immediately take you to a little synopsis about what that issue is that they're discussing. When it comes to guns, it's almost always Second Amendment, and it will remind you of the basics behind that issue in just a few short paragraphs. And then say, you're ready and you want to look at your congressman. Just type in your zip code, and all of the people that represent you here in Bloomington will pop up, from the President of the United States to your 2 U.S. senators to your congressman, whoever is from Bloomington, or if maybe that's, you have a split, I don't know if you have a split district here or not, the split will, what, do you? Yeah, well, a lot of them are like that. You know where that comes from. I won't go there. Okay, so you pick, all of your congressmen will appear, and you pick, federal candidates will appear, and then let's say you want to see if they said anything about guns, the issue you picked. You go down here to statements, and it will give you everything they ever said about it, starting with the most recent thing they said about it. And you can look at the subject matter, and here in this case, that's Second Amendment, what John McCain recently said about it, and it will give you his full statement on guns and how he responded, and you get a chance to look at that. Once you've looked at all the... It's not just what he most recently said. In John McCain's case, it's everything he said on guns in reverse chronological order for 30 years. We have it all. Okay. So then you want to go to ratings. We have almost 300 rating organizations called we call them selfish interests. Right to choose groups, right to life groups, pro-gun, anti-gun, doctors, lawyers, churches, and blah, 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 blah. Goes on forever. We had collect all of the ratings and translate it into like a grade or percentage of support so you can see exactly what they've had to say. In this case, you can see here on guns, the two first up are the National Rifle Association gave John McCain 64%, and the Brady campaign gave him 100%. That's really unusual, by the way. Really unusual. He walks a good line. If you look at all the ratings you want and you've seen what you want, you can go to votes. The most recent key vote that dealt with guns will be explained to you. As I was just mentioning, we have, they're the recent key votes that it will explain. Let's say you pick this one. It will first take you to something you really need, and all citizens really need, and that is You know, not just whether it passed or failed and what the votes were, but a synopsis of the legislation so you don't have to read the 20 pages or 2,000 pages that some of these things are. You get the nuts and bolts. That's why we have these 172 political scientists and journalists that are constantly overseeing our staff and our students that represent every state, know every legislature, and give you a good synopsis of the legislation. And so you can read that to get the essence of the primary purpose of the bill. And if you don't like it, you think, or you don't trust what they've done, you can just go to the bottom of the page, and there it is, the full text, and you can read the whole thing yourself if you want to. Then you can go back and you can pick another issue if you want. Incredibly powerful stuff, but I've got to say this as I close, and I'll take any of your questions that you have. This is nothing. This is done by volunteers. All of this is done by people that volunteered to do it over the years. This isn't, you know, our IT department is two people. It ought to be 50 people. You know, citizens are perfectly capable of defending themselves from this abuse and recapturing control of their civic environment. We are perfectly capable of doing that. I know it's hard to give to the common good. That's something that people have told me for years in the fundraising area. People give to their passions. They give to the candidates they love. They give because of their one way or the other on abortion or guns or whatever. They give to their passions. They don't give to the common good. That's the typical thought is that that just died in the Rooseveltian greatest generation as it's leaving, because that's where they had an altruistic sense of giving back to the common good. Right now, everybody is into their passions. And there's not much support these students have. So I hope you'll sign that little thing out there that says Vote Smart. It's free to join Vote Smart. You'll get a free, before every election, a 100-page manual that gives your delegations a good sampling of your delegation's performance. You get newsletters about, yes, they're going to send you a letter and say, help us now and then. But geez, these are young people that are getting nothing for what they're doing, trying to find enough support. And quite frankly, you know, they're working as hard as they can without anybody knowing. They have no advertising budget to defend you. And more importantly, to defend the millions and millions of people that you are absolutely dependent upon for their good judgment. So I hope you'll consider helping them out sometime. And thank you very much for hearing me out. I don't guarantee I'll be able to see you, but if you have a question, we have... Oh, that's right.
Microphones.
We have microphones. Kate's going to run around and make it easy for you. You're sitting in my wife's chair.
I know that I'm not the perfect substitute, but hear me out. Thank you so much. I love all the things that you said. I just want to kind of push the wonderful stuff you're doing a little further. So many of the questions on surveys and interviews have to do with what is your position on? Well, position on doesn't really tell you what somebody's thinking is. It doesn't tell you how they're struggling in their thinking and all that. How do we create an environment where it's okay for people to say, here's my thoughts about it. I'm not sure exactly, you know, where I'm at. I'm thinking somewhat this way, somewhat that way. How can we create an environment where that is okay? And I'm wondering perhaps if you're doing something about that already.
Well, our questions don't do that, and I'll explain that in a second. And I don't know how you create an environment where somebody, a candidate saying I don't know is acceptable. It doesn't seem to be very acceptable these days. So I don't know how we get that far advanced. But I want you to know for sure that on the questionnaires that we do, it gives, they're usually multiple choice, true and false, and we don't condemn the candidate for not answering it, and they can forget the true false or the multiple choice. They can put in their own words as whatever they want, in a comment, and it counts as passing. We don't even care if their answer to the question is germane. And we've had people answer questions. I had one candidate years ago that went down through the list and said, you're a dumbass organization, you're a dumbass organization, you're a dumbass, and that's how we counted him as having passed, because he was willing to consider the question and utter something, whether it be germane or not, in response, and that's all we cared about. We don't think it went too well over with the people that read the test. When we opened that up, we stripped them of all kinds of excuses. That was really thought out well when we did that. But we don't do that test that way anymore. I got to tell you, we stopped. It was enormously expensive, and the way we do the test now is that we put all that energy. We'll ask them 6 times, or 4 times, I guess it is, during a 6-week period. Won't you do the right and honorable thing? And it's an email. Sometimes calls will occur, but it's mostly email or letter. We'll ask them, and if they don't do it, and they know they're not going to do it, it's now down into the teen percentages that are not doing it. I mean, nobody is doing it hardly. Is that our staff spends all of its time in that department filling out the questionnaire on their behalf based on their public record. And when they are done filling it out based on the public record, the evidence, they then send it to them, say, we've done this for you, we think we're right, but please let us know if we are wrong. And if they don't question it and then it goes in to the database so that our Vote Easy and some of our systems work, and you get some sense of where they stand. But that was the only way we could put them in the box. That leaves them in a way. You know, all of them are worried about one thing. I mean, all those excuses you said, they're only worried about opposition research. That's all they care about. They don't want the opponent to see their position on concerns that their pollster has not stamped as safe as one of their strong talking points. There, they do not want to get outside of that realm. And we practice doing this as candidates. You see it all the time in debates where as you say, oh, that's a great question, but let me just talk for a minute about that stupid son of a bitch and what he said a minute ago, blah, 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 and they get right, they won't say stupid son of a bitch, but that's what they're thinking, and they'll attack something. That's how we practice. Even 30 years ago, it's gotten much better. Even I had to practice not talking about Star Wars and Contra-Aid because my position was not popular in Arizona. So you learn to take the punch in the question and come out with something else. In my case, if I asked a question about Star Wars, I talked about the money and what I could do for clean air and clean water, and Social Security concerns and healthcare concerns. I talk about my positives. You learn to talk about your positives. Don't focus on the negative. Yes, I'm sorry, I went on a long time there.
Oh, I don't need that.
It's coming around the corner here at you anyway.
Just a comment. When you said about Star Wars and Reagan, I never forget the comment by Gorbachev. He said, we don't need Star Wars, we need Star Peace. That's from a Russian.
Yes.
You're talking about these young people. Where are you located? Where are these young people working for you?
It's been in a number of locations. It started with Michael Dukakis pushing very hard for an office at Northeastern University where we were for a number of years, and Mark Hatfield, you may remember his name, a senator from Oregon, pushing for Oregon State. So that's where our office is. Then we consolidated everything at a retreat center. We still own it in Montana, in a beautiful retreat around the wilderness area as an attraction for students. It was enormously successful for bringing in students from all over the country. They've come in from 20 different foreign countries they've come in. But when we discovered over the years we just couldn't really manage putting 60, 70 students at a time that are 17, 18, 19 years in the wilderness without anything else to do and not expect trouble. So we just in January opened up, there were 17 schools that bid for it. We just opened up the offices at Drake University, which in Iowa.
Yeah, I have a question. I have a question. You talked about the billions of dollars being spent on these campaigns. That money in the end has to be spent, and somebody gets rich. Can you tell us approximately where that money goes in broad strokes?
Well, I would guess that the vast majority, I don't know. It used to be, in my day, most of it was to buy the commercial time. Like I said in the debate, you pay a lot of money for the pollsters and the surveys and the tracking polls. You pay a lot of money for consultants that are helping you tailor images to sell and stump speeches and things like that. But in the end, a big chunk of that money is in the PR. Whether it be in the mailings, in the printing, in the TV ads, now certainly in social media and items like that. I'm guessing that has not changed. I got to be honest with you, I haven't looked at it in some time. But the vast majority, the most expensive thing we did in my day was certainly the media buys.
Just like to ask one question, and it's just...
Let me stop. I ought to fill that in. If you're a safe-seated senator or congressman, you collect that money and you give it away often to other candidates to help build your power base because you're not seriously competing. And then at the end, I think, I don't know, maybe they may have changed the law. If you want, you can keep it. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. Here.
Yeah, just want your opinion on this, and it's regarding the print media, newspapers. Do you feel that, are they in the same position that the politicians are in, that they're bought? Are we really getting overall good information from newspapers?
Well, the old legacy media is dead, so I'm not sure. When you say the print media, I don't know that the print media really has much weight anymore. My hometown paper, when I ran for office, had 5 political journalists and 2. A lot of this has happened to the Indianapolis paper. Most of it has gone to Chamber of Commerce, and I assume when you read the paper in Indianapolis, sorry, I could be wrong here. Sorry, I'm guessing almost all the bylines are Associated Press or something else is doing most of their news reporting. There's very little local news reporting. So I can't evaluate each news organization. I think the reputable ones that have try to do their best to be factually accountable. That's where fact-checked organizations came in. To do that for people. There's 2 big ones. The initial one was factcheck.org. If you want to check something where they do an analysis of what's being said or claimed by candidates during an election. And the other one is PolitiFact. Both the presidents of those organizations have been on our board and are on our board. Brooks Jackson started that to help us do this, and we're really fundamental to those organizations because of the enormity of the inaccuracy. Our stuff is not. We don't make mistakes. You know that probably when we came out. We don't make mistakes. I mean, the work is horrible at VoteSmart. It's monotonous, redundant, repetitive. Hell, I mean, you're talking about thousands of votes and ratings and. If you're to come out and vote for it, would help us in this little convention, they ever do so. You sit there and you data enter the votes that happened yesterday on a piece of legislation. You go through every congressman and you data enter their votes and then you prove it. You make sure you're right. You have to sign a little thing saying you proved it and you guarantee that this is accurate. It goes to a staff member. The staff member puts in 6 intentional errors. And it needs to be proofread 3 more times where they catch only the intentional errors and find no other. If they find any other error, it starts from the beginning, it goes over. We don't make mistakes. I mean, so that's why, our biggest users are Google and Bing and the Defense Department. It keeps overseas troops and State Department officials informed on our stuff. This will tell you something. The biggest user we ever had, by far, came in one day and sucked every bit of data we ever had out, crashed all of our computers. Was the government of China. They were real interested in knowing the reality of the behavior of our candidates. They didn't care so much about the BS. They wanted to know the person they were really dealing with, the people.
You sort of touched on it, but I'd like to know, is VoteSmart allying with other NGOs concerning voting and registration and other such issues?
We can tell you where to get registered and do a lot of that stuff on our website. I can't tell you how difficult it is to keep this organization absolutely pristine clean. That's why we can't get on our board without a political enemy. My favorite coupling ever was Newt Gingrich and Jerry Ferraro. We couldn't get much different than those two. But that keeps us from directly affiliating. We'll help anybody. Even the League of Women Voters, which we, our founding, Lucy Benson, the president of the National League, was one of our founders. So was Peggy Lample, who was the national director of the League of Women Voters, one of our original founders. But I have board members that would be upset if we dealt directly and affiliated and put our logos with any other NGO or local organization whatsoever, because some of them wouldn't like the League of Women Voters lobbying arm. They have a lobbying arm that deals with education. I think it's great. Some of my board members don't think it's all great. We have one purpose only, and that is to collect the data. And collect that data in a format, in a way that is so accurate that it is just as useful to a right-wing conservative as it is a left-wing liberal. So we can't, I was asked at a speech last night, there were some candidates in the audience, they said, could they use our logo on their site? And I said, absolutely not. You can't do it. You can't do anything like it. We don't affiliate with it. We will say whether or not they took the test. When they did it on their own and we had to fill it out for them, we'll say that it either helps or hurts them. But we can't really, we help people. If an NGO wants our stuff, for example, we had a lot of them from foreign countries call us. And State Farm used to send our staff, hasn't done it in years, send our staff out to burgeoning democracies to show them how we do what we do. It was impossible. We had one, they asked us to go to Mongolia. What are you going to do about what we do in Mongolia? There's no recording records at all. I mean, but we'll help. We're there to help, basically, but we can't really associate with anybody that has, even our money is strictly controlled. We can't take money from corporations or labor unions or any organizations that are lobbying or supporting our opposing candidates. We take money from individual citizens. There's about 15,000 of them that are willing to put an average contribution of about $40. And old robber baron foundations. And what I mean by that is they have to be, they can no longer be associated with the original corporate source of their money. I'm talking about Carnegie. And they don't really fund us anymore. They all pulled out of voter education in 2009 during the downturn. Their version of voter education is get out the vote, voter registration, new immigrants, stuff like that. And that's because, quite frankly, most of the major foundations that are into that game are liberal in their orientation. And I just got livid with them when they pulled out of our version of voter education, because they're suggesting that, if they can go into a certain segment of society, whether it be low income or minority or poorly educated or new immigrants, they know that 70% of those people they register are going to vote their agenda. So why educate? What are you talking about? I got furious with someone, which is probably why I'm having trouble raising money for foundations.
I have a question. I appreciate how much work goes into the research that you have with incumbents. How do you handle challengers, or do you try to give effort to challengers when there's no record?
We cover everybody, and it's absolutely right. It's much more difficult to cover somebody that's never had public office. But that's where the courage test comes in. They are much more likely, a challenger is much more likely to provide that information because there's so little out there on them. We get their bios in great detail. We, of course, don't have a voting record on them. We collect their speeches. We do everything that we can on this. But mostly it's collecting their issue positions that our staff works on and filling out Vote Easy, which gives you a good sense of it. We cover all candidates. We don't make a distinction. If they file with the Secretary of State or whatever the facsimile is in your state or any state, and then as soon as they file, our staff is on top of it. They get to them, they reach them, they start collecting data wherever it's available on them, and it doesn't matter whether they're credible candidates or not. My favorite candidate ever in that category was a candidate on the ballot for Congress in Las Vegas, Nevada, by the name of the Lord God Almighty. Now, how he got on the ballot, but that was their rules there. Anyway, he lost. We don't, we cover everything. Okay, if we, one more?
Actually, this is kind of a follow-up to the previous question. Once someone is elected, is there a certain amount of lag time to getting information up on the site? Because I actually looked at one of our congressional representatives, and he's like the mystery man from nowhere. I mean, in terms of the information available on his background and that sort of thing.
You're kidding. What's his name?
Trey Hollingsworth.
That's not his first name.
Oh.
Trey is.
I can't imagine that. They are usually up spot on.
There was no information on his education. There's some information, but
unless he's kept it hidden somehow, they'll call. They'll go to his pages. They'll ask it for him when they do the national piece. Unless he didn't provide it, it's not available on his website, and he's not offering it openly. That might be the problem, but I can't imagine we miss somebody. They would have everything that they could have gotten from him, even if they have to get it from news articles.
What's his name again?
Trey Hollingsworth.
Our conference.
Okay. Indiana 9.
District 9.
Are there any other questions?
Okay.
You got one more? Okay.
One last one. And I'll stick around for anybody that has any more questions a little bit, but I do have to drive towards Des Moines tonight. Is that because I'm getting out of town? One last question you had?
It was just a question. You alluded to the fact that our students are not getting an education in civics anymore, or to the degree that maybe we did 20, 30 years ago. And I personally feel like that's a big problem. Yeah. So we're not going to have an educated citizenry who can ask for information about issues. Do you have any ideas on that?
Well, yeah, it's dropped 33% in K through 8, and it's dropped 66% in high school. And a lot of people suggest that that's because in the teacher testing system that have been adopted all over the country, they're not tested on civics. They're tested on the other items, and so a teacher is naturally going to focus on where they're going to be scored and how they're going to be tested, and that's what's happened in civics education. Now, some states are coming around a little bit and realizing that that's a mistake and adopting procedures that try to correct it. Not everywhere, but it is. But it's a huge, that's what creates, it's hard for us to imagine this, but these young people that are coming in our doors, even when they're in college, they've never seen politics work any differently. They know nothing about Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan hoisting a beer every week and actually talking and communicating. They don't know that when I worked in Washington, everybody lived there, their kids went to Sitwell School, they knew each other, there was a sobering attitude about getting to know your opponent socially. At the embassy party, it's hard to call your Jimmy's best friend, your son's best friend's father, a bastard. There was just something that was sort of tied you down a little bit. These people don't know each other anymore. They don't live in Washington. They fly in there on Tuesday just in time for a vote, and out of there right off Thursday, and they're home, and their families live in their hometowns, and that environment is all gone. That's why we have a record number. Part of the reason we have a record number of party line votes. They cannot talk to one. All they know about each other is the last horrible thing that was said about them from across the aisle in the newspaper or the print. We're all learning to hate each other. I mean, it's just a really horrible situation that we are perfectly capable of correcting. Thank you very much for hearing.